sure we'll have some more rolling in, but I want to be conscious of everybody's time, and so we'll get started here. Welcome everyone to another installment of the Analytics Enthusiast webinar series powered by Birchworks Recruiting. My name is John Lynn. I'm a recruiting manager at Birchworks and have been working with industry leaders across data science, analytics, to provide content to the audience and enthusiasts in the industry. The analytics enthusiasts, we bring together quantitative data, marketing research professionals, really to share insights, ideas, perspectives with others, through a thought leadership community. Right now, due to the state of the world, everything's going to be part of this webinar series for the time being. But we hope to have some in-person events at some point in the future when it becomes socially acceptable to do so. Tonight, I'm super excited to have this panel of gentlemen hosted by Scott Nestler. Scott really was instrumental in putting this group together to talk about, kind of the evolution of sports analytics, looking back at the past, where we're at present, and maybe some perspective on where they see things going in the future. Before I turn it over to Scott, I just do want to mention, if you have any interest in being involved at all and would like to be part of a webinar or have ideas for topics that you'd like to hear about, reach out to us at analyticsenthusiast@birchworks.com. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Scott, and you can take it away.
All right, thanks, John. Like you said, my name's Scott Nestler. I'm a faculty member at the University of Notre Dame. I serve as an associate teaching professor and also the academic director of our Master of Science in Business Analytics program. So that's my day job. And then as part of my service to the university, I am the advisor for the Sports Analytics Club here on campus, which is primarily an undergraduate club, although we do have some graduate students that join as well. We do a number of things like hosting guest speakers from teams and leagues and industry. And then also we have teams of students working with about a half dozen of our teams here in Notre Dame athletics, doing analytic work for the team, supporting the coaches, the trainers, and the student athletes. So I get to have a lot of fun with that. In theory, service takes up 20% of my job, but sometimes it grows beyond that, and that's okay because it's a whole lot of fun. So I put together a panel here with a few friends and colleagues that I've met over the years who are all involved in sports analytics in one way or another, and I think in somewhat different ways from each other, which is why I asked each of them. I think they'll each have something interesting to contribute. So I'm going to kind of go around to them and ask them to provide just a little bit of background so that you can get to know them a little bit, and then just kind of where they fit in the sports analytics landscape today. So I'm going to start in the upper right corner of my screen as I'm looking at it. So Kostas Pelakrinis, you're up first.
Yeah, thanks Scott, and thanks everyone for coming. Just a quick background for me. I am a faculty and associate professor at the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh, and part of my work has been analyzing sports data. So overall, my work is on analytics, but particularly I'm interested in sports data for many reasons. One being that I love sports and basketball, but I was never tall enough to become a pro, so I thought to find a different way to stay connected. But also, it's a very interesting way, engaging way to attract young kids to STEM education.
All right, thanks, Kostas. John Tobias, you're up next.
Thanks for the opportunity, Scott. How you doing? My name is John Tobias. I travel as a TV statistician for ESPN. Most people don't know what that is, but if you happen to be watching a great game, like let's say the Lakers and Golden State last night, and you may hear your favorite announcer may make a comment stating that LeBron James has scored the last 12 points, and those 12 points came in the paint, that's somebody that's sitting right beside them, giving them that information, I guess more or less to make them look smart and really just to convey really good advanced stats to the TV audience that are actually watching the game. So that's what I do. And I'm also a sports analytics lecturer at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, in the School of Data Science. And I've been traveling as a statistician with ESPN since 2013. And you can just really see firsthand, not just the impact that analytics has from a team standpoint, from a player standpoint, but even in the TV industry, because it's really all about educating the audience that's actually watching the game.
Great. Has the travel picked up again, or are you still sitting next to someone in a room like this for the time being?
It's starting to pick up a little bit. I'm scheduled actually to go to the Olympics on July the 20th, but I don't think that I'll be going to Tokyo. I think I would be in the studio. So it's getting close to 100%, but not quite there yet. Fingers crossed, though.
All right. Thanks. And then Sam Huddleston, let's hear a little bit from you, please.
I'm Sam Huddleston. I'm a senior data scientist at a company called Biocore LLC. We are the safety engineering firm that supports the National Football League. And so I spent a lot of time doing data science work that supports player health and safety within the NFL to identify rule changes, equipment changes, and anything else that we can do in order to make the game safer. Another role that I have is that I'm the technology lead for a big project called the Digital Athlete, which is a collaboration between the NFL and the Amazon Web Services. And that project seeks to leverage cutting edge technology. So we're using things like computer vision, pose technology, embedding models, all sorts of kind of state-of-the-art machine learning and AI products in order to try to improve the health and safety. And so now bringing those into the fold. So I don't work on trying to win games. I work on trying to make the game safer while maintaining the integrity of the game. And it's very interesting to sort of see the interplay between the systems that are used to understand the game for the purposes of winning can also be leveraged to make the game safer and improve equipment, rules, and best practices within teams to keep people safe.
All right, thanks everyone. Now that the audience has a little bit of idea of where each of us is coming from, let's talk a little bit about the topic of today's webinar, which we said was the evolution of analytics in sports, past, present, and future. And if we think back to, believe it or not, it's been 18 years since the book Moneyball came out, and about 10 years since the movie version came out, which I know is what got a lot of people started and interested in this field. We've seen a lot of change. Those of us who've been doing this sort of thing for that long, or a good portion of it, have seen a lot of change in that time. The data has changed from box score data to play-by-play data to now tracking data and beyond. And I'm just curious to hear a little bit about, as the data has changed, how has what you have done changed as well? And a little bit of, where do you see it going in the future as additional data becomes available or additional techniques become available? So who wants to take that one first? John, you want to give it a go?
Sure, I'll give it a try. Well, I guess just to really put it in perspective, when I was in graduate school about maybe 15 years ago, I interned with the Charlotte Hornets. And at that time, around 2005, 2006, you very rarely saw any person, forget about in terms of like an analytics team, but even having like an analytics person on staff, that was very much an anomaly. But now, fast forward to 2021, whether it's MLB, NBA, MLS, NHL, NFL, I think that it's more of an anomaly to where you don't have anyone, providing analytics, whether it's a staff or a person. So that just in itself lets you know how it's really changed from a team standpoint, no matter which organization, no matter which sport that you are, from an American standpoint.
Great, thanks. Who else?
Yeah, I think to look at it from a different point of view, I think the way that someone can think the evolution of sports analytics is going from the macro level of analysis to the very detailed, fine grain. So you can imagine it as with the box score data and data about game results. You can get a macro view of the league, the teams. Then you've got the play-by-play data where you can get a little bit deeper, maybe get a macro view of the performance of the players. But now with tracking data, you can really see which aspect of the game I can go down at the micro level and see, this specific player is very good at closing out. It's very kind of just go from the top level. We went from the high level to really the micro level of analysis.
Yeah, I think another way to look at it, as a data scientist, to me, what's really interesting is to watch what's happening with how the data is collected. And so, there's kind of these three stages that I think of. One is, stage one was we had humans that would sort of observe the sport, and they would collect information about the sport and maybe put it into a table or whatever. And that happened for a long time. And then there's been a real revolution that's started to happen with the tracking technologies. And so, that's a data set that I use every day that is really changing the sport. But what's interesting to me is that I think that the tracking technology is now, expanding across the leagues, but we're right at just the edge of what can be done with the tracking technology. And then there's a new technology that isn't out there, but is emerging and is really where I'm actually putting a lot of work into right now for the health and safety purposes, which is computer vision. And so, what I see now is that within the National Football League, the tracking technology came out in about 2016. By now, I think every team has people who are leveraging that data for winning, and we're talking to these folks, and there's APIs and people are leveraging that system. But before we even get very deep into leveraging that, the computer vision revolution is starting to land. And so, it's not the sport I work on, but the things that Second Spectrum is doing are pretty amazing in the NBA. We're working on very similar things using computer vision technologies in the National Football League right now. I'm very focused on analyzing, collecting pose data to simulate on-field injury, post-analysis, et cetera. But the technologies that we're leveraging are also, just have so many applications for the study of the game and improving technique. And I think you're seeing those reports start to hit, right? Where in baseball, pose is being leveraged to a good bit with, bat swings and things like that. And at the quarterback level, it's starting to hit the NFL. But there's just this explosion that's about to take place in both tracking systems and computer vision, just one right after the other. And so I find this fascinating in that there's an entire community of people, data scientists that work on sensor fusion and computer vision and like track data, which has been GPS track data has been a big part of other fields. And now those folks are in demand within the sports world because you have this background of being able to leverage this sensor information in a way that's never been leveraged in sports.
I think you're exactly right, Sam. One of the things, and John kind of mentioned it earlier, how it used to be that professional teams, might have an analyst. Now they have teams of 3 or 5 or 27 if you're the Los Angeles Dodgers or whatever their number currently is. But, the other thing we're starting to see is, well, like I mentioned, I have students working for, university teams, college level teams here. I have 40 analysts for my college baseball team here. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, they're all volunteers because they want to do it, which I think is awesome, though. But then I'm hearing about high school analysts now, and you mentioned, with computer vision, a lot of changes coming down the pike. I mean, so I had one undergrad student this year who is a swimmer, a competitive swimmer, and he had an idea for, hey, if I can get this video of swimming turns, we can do some work using computer vision to do some judgment on what's a good turn versus a bad turn, and use that for training purposes to help our swimmers do better, from analyzing it, not just watching the video, as a human and pointing, hey, that's a good one, that's a bad one, but actually, looking through lots and lots of video and gaining insights from that as to what makes turns good or bad. So there's one example of a student research project I've seen. And then you mentioned, body pose. One of the things is, if you think about a lot of the systems that we've had with either cameras or GPS tracking and whatnot, I mean, that's all well and good for professional leagues and teams. There's enough money there to support the infrastructure and the personnel to do that. Most colleges don't have that, and high school and recreational leagues certainly don't. But there's a lot of broadcast or home video out there of sports that with body pose technology can be used to do quite a lot. I mean, I've seen some interesting applications, say in basketball, of something that I could take with the camera on my iPhone, and it's amazing where I think we're headed there.
Yeah, I think we're headed towards digital coaches. I mean, one of the interesting things, this is work that's happening in our lab here, just this last week, is, evaluating how much of a difference, say, an open source, buying an iPad or an iPhone and setting those up on tripods, and then trying to do some pose analysis for something like a functional movement screen. And what kind of gain do you get from having a high-end system versus something that you can buy off the shelf and sort of set up? And the high-end system is way better, but man, iPhones cameras are getting better every day. And so the interesting thing is that because these supporting technologies like camera systems and phones, et cetera, are getting so many gains in so fast, within a few years, what was state of the art just a couple of years ago for a camera system is going to be, available to sort of everybody. And then the interesting part of this is that with cloud technology and the ability to kind of push up to the cloud and leverage something like a digital trainer or something like that that's evaluating your performance, we're going to get to the point where technologies that require massive investment, like you said, are going to be available to the masses. You're going to have these AI coaches that can evaluate your technique and give you feedback. You're going to have functional movement screens that you can do that will give you the kind of assessments that are done by a high-end professional. And a big advantage of all of this, I think, is that these models are consistent, right? And so we see with a lot of the sports stats and reporting and things that are done right now by humans, there's inconsistencies maybe in the way that things are collected or graded or whatever, but the algorithms might not be as good as the best people, but they are at least consistent. And so there's going to be a big boom in what is available to the average person, the high school athlete, that trickles down from the elite levels in the coming years.
So over time, one of the things I've noticed is that, some sports maybe we could say moved out quicker when it came to analytics for a variety of reasons. I mean, baseball maybe is the example of the one that moved out the quickest for a couple of reasons. A lot of data, many seasons, many games per season, very discrete action or activity in the field. Most of the game, it's an isolated interaction between two, maybe three players. Occasionally the other ones get into it, versus other sports where there are both more players on the on the field or court and or just having lots more interactions. We've seen basketball, hockey come a long way. Football certainly made a lot of progress. I'm curious, we think about those being the four big sports here. I know in Europe, there's really only one sport, and, much of the other parts of the world, soccer or the other football, and then cricket in certain parts of the world as well. But I'm curious, anybody have any good examples from, some of the less big name sports where you're starting to see analytics used? So I mentioned soccer, or sorry, I mentioned swimming as one example where I've seen some interest. Any interesting examples from other sports that you've seen in recent years that you think are gonna, become more popular?
Well, I have seen at the academic community, but actually it's a little bit different. It's both academic and actually the professional teams in Europe in volleyball. So they have started using analytics in order to identify, evaluate players, identify best strategies. And I'm not very familiar with volleyball, but that was one of the things that kind of surprised me. I mean, it's not a very popular sport in Europe. It's much more popular than in the US, for example, but it's still not at the top 3 sports. But still, there is quite some analytics work happening, mainly in the academic sphere, but with collaboration from professional teams. So that was something that I found interesting.
One sport that I would like to add actually is probably the fastest growing sport in the young demographic, 18 to 24, and that's mixed martial arts in terms of like with the UFC. UFC, of course, signed a big contract a couple years ago with ESPN, and I believe that they've really done a good job in terms of like giving like advanced stats. For example, boxing, you would see like CompuBox scores to where you see how many strikes, how many body punches. With UFC, they've adopted that, and they pretty much taken it to like the next level, to where whenever this particular fighter has this many strikes, the percentages rises to where it ends up being like in a stoppage or in a knockout. And this is something that the audience or the consumer, they really weren't privy to at the time. But I think that that's something that's becoming more advanced as the sport increasingly gets more and more popular, not just from a United States standpoint, but from a worldwide global standpoint.
Yeah, I think another sport that should be mentioned is Australian rules football, mostly because Australian rules football is driving this technological change that's happening in other sports, because the tracking, many of the best tracking vendors sort of started there, and we're supporting that community. And when it comes to performance tracking systems, for example, the next gen stats system is the performance tracking system that's used for NFL games. But that drive sort of came out of Australia, and there's just been tons of research on performance tracking, and that has then, moved over to European football and soccer. It's moved into hockey now. It's moved into the National Football League is now leveraging it, but it started really in Australia with this league, and they are really pushing the boundaries and are always kind of at the bleeding edge of that. And so that's been sort of interesting to be able to leverage, these great gains that they made in Australian rules football and their safety programs too. I see a lot of that, but a lot of the best research and early research in leveraging performance systems for athlete health and safety and monitoring and that sort of stuff came out of Australia, and is now just exploded in use of it over the global community.
Yeah, I'll echo what Sam said there, that there are a lot of people working in particularly what would be called sports science, who come from Australia and or New Zealand. And I think a lot of that came from prior to the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, actually, when the national organizations there said, hey, look, we may not be some of the largest countries on the world stage, but we're going to have everybody here and we want to put on a good showing. Let's think about how we can work smarter, not harder. And they really started investing in sports science, which obviously has some overlap with sports analytics. And we're seeing many the number of education programs they have there in the area that are top notch, and many of their graduates working here in a variety of leagues and universities here now is disproportionate to the size of the country, for sure. I think you're right about that. And actually, John, when you said one that ought to be mentioned is MMA, I thought you were going somewhere else with that among the younger demographic. I thought you were headed towards esports, which I'm going to throw out there. And I have some friends who are into all sorts of e-gaming, some of which are considered sports, some of which are different. But the amount of data that are or can be collected in those sorts of games makes for interesting analytic opportunities as well. So that's another one that I think is gaining a lot, and there are opportunities there, and there's got to be crossover between what you learn and can do in one sport or one domain, even to esports. Yeah.
Absolutely, I totally agree, for sure. Because I think that students are starting to realize even more, to where even like the gamers, to where you can break into the industry in terms of the esports industry, to your point, not just by being a gamer, but there's so many positions now, they're starting to become available as a data analyst. I guess it's kind of like the supply and demand, type of analogy, because, whether it's Activision or whether it's, esports or anything in general, Activision, Blizzard, they're really starting to become much more popular. And again, a supply and demand, to where you have a lot of opportunities out there. And I think that young students are really starting to recognize that as well.
Yeah, and speaking of about students and this young demographic, I'm come from an educational background, academic background. So I think it's a very nice way to introduce kids, high school kids or even middle school kids, to some very basic notions of analytics, like uncertainty, very high level notions that are useful not only in sports but in everyday life, and try to make them interested in this space. It's different when you can relate to what someone is describing, rather than some abstract notions of uncertainty and data. So I have found that usually this approaching education of people from the perspective of sports analytics or other things that might interest people in general, entertainment analytics, can be movies or other things. It helps convey the message you want much better and keep them engaged, obviously.
Yeah, completely agree. I am, along with two colleagues here, teaching what we call a summer scholars program for 2 weeks to high school students who are between their junior and senior year of high school. I mean, the university's been doing this for decades in a variety of areas. We just started the one on sports analytics last summer, though. But I'll have 40 students, unfortunately not here due to the, still being at the tail end of the pandemic. So they'll be virtual this summer again, like they were last year. But 40, high school students who in 2 weeks, they're going to learn how to code in R and do a project in an R Markdown document that they're going to present to their to their classmates, a few faculty members, and some of the folks from Notre Dame athletics by the end of that 2 weeks. And last year we had a few who then applied to the university and came in, and they were like, hey, I want to be a business analytics major because I was in the sports analytics class. I think it's a great way to introduce quantitative methods to students who maybe wouldn't be as enthusiastic about it because it's an area they really care about and are passionate about. The one bit of pushback that I actually gave the university leadership last year was, I said, okay, so, and it was a smaller class last year. We only had 2 instructors last year. This year we have 3, so we're willing to take on a larger class. But we had about 24 students, and we actually had fairly good male-female balance. I mean, it was maybe 60-40, which I thought was pretty good. I was happy with that. But there were very few underrepresented minorities in the class, in the cohort. And I said to the admissions folks, something I'd really like to see us do for next year is to see if we can increase the diversity to be more inclusive in who we get involved in this, because as I look across our community, I don't see much diversity, and I think it's something we need to work on. I know that some of you have encountered this as well, and I'm curious, if you can share any other ways that you're starting to see efforts to be more inclusive and get a broad spectrum of people involved across sports analytics.
I definitely think that it starts with high school, for sure, because that old cliche, you don't know what you don't know. And I think a lot of times when you have students, especially students that are underrepresented groups, a lot of times whenever they hear the word analytics, I think a lot of times they immediately think about coding, think about Python, R, SQL. There are levels to any type of like industry or any type of job that you do, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Even like when it comes to like contract negotiations, Devontae Adams, of course, the wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, he's scheduled to be 28 years old, Aaron Rodgers' favorite target. He's scheduled to be a free agent next year. Well, a lot of times if you are his agent, you're going to have to go ahead and look at some type of data to where you're going to have to support I say, okay, I believe that my client should get paid this amount of money because he's done this, this, this. And it's still using math, it's still using advanced stats, but it's just not in terms of like high level to where you're breaking down from a coding standpoint. And I think a lot of times underrepresented groups and minorities, they don't really connect the dots and understand that you can use advanced stats and math in a very fun way in terms of breaking things down like that, salary caps, once again, contract negotiations. And I think that that excites them more so, and it makes them realize that there is an opportunity to where they can actually break into the sports industry without having to be an athlete, without having to be a coach, without having to be an athletic trainer. And I think that when that is more or less instilled in them, I think that it will resonate more. But of course, it's a brick by brick type thing. But I definitely think that it starts with high school, because that's when they're really starting to find out exactly what they want to do. And I think that when they realize that it's an opportunity, I think that kind of changes the narrative a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay. So I completely agree with John, and just to add something that I feel tangentially related. One of the things that I have been trying to do here with our athletics department is that so we have a lot of student athletes, right? And fortunately or unfortunately, a very small fraction of them will become pros when they finish their collegiate career. Getting a background in analytics could be a way to stay in their sport. They can use the knowledge they have acquired from the sport and some new skills they get, and it still stay in the sports industry. So that's obviously a way to get student athletes, more opportunities of staying in sports. It doesn't necessarily help with the pipeline issue from high school. But another thing that I suggested a couple of 5 years now to the previous AD here, Pitt, and at that point it seemed really sci-fi, but now it might be able to become reality. Is that, what about giving scholarships to students that are going to take some STEM-related degree, but they will also be the analysts for teams at college? Because volunteering is fine, but we shouldn't be. We should pay the students for work they do that benefits the university. That goes into student athlete compensation, stuff like that, which is not what we're discussing. But overall, I think volunteering was good up to a point, but now I think college teams that make use of more and more time of the students, they definitely should find a way to compensate them.
Yeah, I think another thing too is just in providing opportunities to get involved and try this thing out. So, something that I've been really excited about, and it's been kind of funny to watch unfold, is that the NFL has started to crowdsource some of these both analytics problems and the player health and safety problems that I work on. And so, the last few years I've run competitions on Kaggle in order to try to solve some of the real world problems we're working on. And Mike Lopez, who kind of heads up the analytics side of the NFL, has been running a sports analytics focused competition. And some years it's a research competition. Some years it's a coding competition, and we've kind of swapped back and forth of who's doing what. But what I'd say is we can get the word out to people, because what I've been really impressed with working with Kaggle is the fact that there's this community of incredible data scientists and engineers that work on there that are also teaching, educating, and supporting sort of the rest of the community. And if you're looking to kind of learn how to do things, it's not so much the Kaggle platform itself, but rather that there's this global community of people that are really excited about just these ideas of data science and analytics, et cetera. And sports seems to resonate with folks. And so people are logging on there and really participating and educating and posting their examples in code. And something that I've found really interesting is that a couple of the last few competitions have been won by international folks. So a team out of Europe, won the NFL's Big Data Bowl, I think, last year. A Russian guy who lives in Australia won the competition that I launched last year. And so there's been this democratization of the ability to sort of work on these problems. And I think it'd be cool, this little challenge out there. Hey, other leagues, National Hockey League, NBA, right? Get your stuff out there and see what the world can do, and give people the opportunity to kind of interact with your sport, because we've seen some really good kind of embracing this within the data science community for football. And I think it'd be pretty cool if we got some other sports up there participating, not only in solving your problems, and I'll tell you that we get a ton out of this, but also getting senior engineers who work at the world's leading companies that are mentoring and educating and supporting the new folks who are coming in and asking these questions in the forums about how to get started. And if we could get that going for a bunch of different communities, I think that's just a great way, a grassroots way of getting people involved and letting them try stuff.
Yes, Sam, I want to echo what you just said in terms of that, word or cliche, getting the word out, because I really think that's what it boils down to in terms of, again, what I said earlier, like, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of times at these particular schools, to where it's predominantly, African-American or Latino, they have no idea that these type of positions in terms of sports analytics even exist. And it's really all about access. And it's just like a story that was done a couple months ago in the Boston Globe, and I was interviewed for, and I really said, and I still believe that it's really all about access, because I believe access then creates opportunity. Everybody wants an opportunity. Of course, you want to make sure that you're prepared, but first it starts off with access. And again, a lot of these students that are very bright have no idea that these type of positions that you and us three are very privy to and have a good understanding, they have no idea that it's even out there.
Yeah, and you can win a job. So the folks that have won these analytics competition and finish at the top, right? It's a very, what's been sort of cool is to see folks that are, in grad school or something like that, kind of do really well in these competitions. And then NFL teams are hiring folks that are performing in these competitions. And these are folks that there is no way that you would have ever gotten that interview, but you show up, right? It's an open field. We put the rules out there and you get to compete and you get to show your stuff. And that gives you the chance and the opportunity. And so, I just think, this has been really cool. Like the Kaggle idea and this sort of open competition idea has had a lot of impact in the data science community, number one. But I think that it's also sort of impacting sports, because as these sports leagues have sort of, the NFL's put this up there, people are getting hired through this sort of process. But I haven't seen the NBA or Major League Soccer or whatever putting their problems up there. And in some ways, maybe it's good, right? Because then my problem gets lots of focus. But I think it'd be cool if that was leveraged a bit more. It's a way to provide an opportunity to have people engage with your sport, and it's very democratic, right? And it's open to anyone to get in there and sort of have out these sorts of things. And I just think this has been really cool, and a chance for our community to kind of, nudge people to do more in that space and provide the chance for people to work on these really interesting problems.
I think you're right, Sam. In their defense, I will say the NBA has run a hackathon for a number of years. It hasn't been on Kaggle, but they've opened it up to students across the country or world, and I've had some students enter and do well in it, so I know they do offer that opportunity. But it would be good to see more of them out there. I agree with you. One of my favorite papers or presentations from the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference was in 2017 from John Drazen, and it was about using basketball analytics to broaden the appeal of math and science among youth. I mean, even pre-high school, and kind of showing them just kind of like from a real simplified shot chart, hey, here's how you can become a better basketball player. and oh, by the way, you're going to learn some math and analytics along the way too, you know, but kind of tying it together for them. I think we should have more efforts like that out there at younger ages as well.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think what John actually is doing at ESPN as a statistician for games stats could actually be augmented on the broadcast, which ESPN has done in the past few augmented reality broadcasts, where it can create also more informed fans, and it can actually you know, make fans understand the game better, while also understanding things like uncertainty. So they hear analytics don't like post-ups in basketball. They don't like mid-range shots. If the broadcast was annotated with why this is the case, that this shot has, you know, 0.8 expected points or doesn't have a good chance of being made, then they might start understanding better what analytics is about, and not what, you know, people on the broadcast say about analytics when they don't like them and stuff like that. So it's pretty it can be a good way of introducing not just the students, but, you know, all the mass that is watching the games, and, you know, they can get a better understanding of what it's about.
Yeah, I'm starting to see a few questions come in from the audience, so I'm going to throw these out here. This one might be for Sam, because I think it's based on something he said earlier. There was a question about you know, the methods that we were talking about and whether they can incorporate, you know, significant anatomical variation between athletes into this digital coaching technology. You know, one of the things about humans is they can maybe deviate from a standard model or approach, you know, when an athlete is noticeably different. How can that work in with these more data informed, you know, automated systems?
Yeah, wow, there must be a biomechanical engineer out there that's dialing that one in. So that is a problem that we are working on hard. You know, so one of the real goals of our program is to be able to observe an athlete with markerless motion capture and create a very accurate and biofidelic model of that person. That's a tough problem. But, you know, there are sort of constraints, and, you know, I don't know how much we want to get into the mechanical engineering, and I'll point out that I was a mechanical engineer for undergrad and walked away from that. So I'm very much a data scientist and not an expert on the biomechanical engineering portions. But, you know, that's an unsolved problem, but something that folks are working really hard on. And there's a bunch of different people working on it. There's universities that are working on it. But, you know, what is sort of cool, and I think this is where the AI stuff is neat, is that, you know, there are constraints on the human body. And for many other things, you know, basically you need a data set that's big enough and has enough people in it that is marked appropriately. And then you're sort of able to apply those. And so computer vision is being applied in so many different ways. There are really good marker systems right now, I think, that work pretty well. My sense is that right now we can't do that, right? It's not 100% accurate, but I think that within 3 to 5 years, you'll be able to use a markerless system to get a very accurate human pose out for anybody, regardless of their body shape, because the research is being done by a bunch of companies. Dari is actually a company out there that I'm familiar with, really working hard on this. You know, Vald out of Australia is doing some work in this area, and there's other folks that are out there pounding away at it. And that's a problem that you have to solve in order to be able to kind of push this out for everybody. But it's interesting. It's hard.
Well, in order to solve hard problems like that and some of the other ones we've been talking about, obviously, you know, you need some sort of background, some sort of toolkit. You know, let's quickly go around from each of us and kind of say, you know, hey, if you were giving advice to a young person interested in getting into sports analytics, what would you recommend they learn? What would you recommend they do? I'm going to leave it fairly broad and see where it goes. So, Costas, what would be your recommendation for for a young person interested in getting into sports analytics?
Yeah, I feel that there are many different paths to follow, but the one that I kind of followed, and I think it has a lot of possibilities in the future to go outside of sports, is to get an education in stats or computer science, one of these fields that you wouldn't traditionally think then you can work as in sports analytics. And the reason that I mentioned that is because for good or for bad, sports is a fun a fun industry to work in. Some people, as they get older, might not like the lifestyle of a sports analyst, working for a team, the stress or things like that. So you need to have a way to do something that is very relevant to your skill set, but maybe not in sports. So, for example, one of the things that we are doing with basketball data is analyzing player trajectories and trying to understand how players of both teams interact in space. These skills and models can actually be used, let's say, in self-driving cars, because there essentially you have the trajectory of a car trying to anticipate what the pedestrians are going to do. So there is a lot of there are a lot of other things that you could do once you decide you don't want to be in sports anymore. So one of the ways that I would suggest that has kind of some cushions also for the future is to go in one of those fields that traditionally you wouldn't think of as applying sports analysts, but could broaden what you can do after that.
Okay, John, what do you think? I'll get to you, Sam, in a minute. John.
Sam, if you really need to talk, I see you have your hand raised. Go for it. I want to be a gentleman.
No, somebody walked by my office and waved at me, and I waved back.
Okay. I will forget about you being a gentleman. Okay. But the one thing I was saying, actually, this is something that's been going on for a long time, and it's something simple, but a lot of times people don't really connect the dots. And that's really getting experience in terms of just getting an internship, not just an internship, but a real quality internship. And I think that it's more valuable now than ever, because years ago, let's say if you had one position available, and let's say if you had two people apply, one had a 4.0, the other one had a 3.0. 9 times out of 10, the person with the 4.0 would get that job. But now it's more important now, just as important, that students have experience. So either you can go ahead and do that by an internship, or you can just take the initiative by just creating a project, for any particular person, any particular team, because I think number one, that shows initiative, that shows drive. And I think that's something that really gets on employers' radars for sure. And then another thing I would say is pick up a sport or something in the industry that's on the rise. Like, let's say, for example, sports betting. That's something that is becoming more and more popular. If you think about it, several years ago, even talking about sports betting was something that was very taboo. But now on Fox, you have a show called Fox Bet. On ESPN, you have a show called Daily Wager, and it's all centered around gambling. And I think that a lot of times, if you become really smart in something that's niche, that's on the rise like that, in terms of learning, predictive models, anything along those lines, I think that really puts you in a great position for these large companies, your FanDuel, DraftKings. I just think that is really something that's on the rise, especially when you have more and more states that's starting to pass, sports betting and gambling laws. Because then you're teaching in terms of like not, using something on emotion, but based on numbers.
Yeah, I just had one of my master's students who graduated last year, was hired by, I don't remember, it was either DraftKings or FanDuel, one of the two. And he's doing plenty of interesting analytic modeling work there for sure. Yeah, Sam, what do you think?
I'll leverage the fact that I'm going last to double down on what both of them said, right? So, I think my advice, and I think this is true if you're going to be doing any sort of data science or analyst work, not just sports, but in football we talk about blocking and tackling, and I think in my world of data science, it comes down to really two skill sets that are foundational. The first one is you have to know how to code. And I'm somebody that was sort of self-taught for coding. I went through grad school and sort of taught myself, and pretty deep into, probably 5 or 6 years into it, I actually had to start teaching a coding course. I was a professor, and so I sort of teamed up with professional computer scientists and took some crash courses. And then I learned that I had skipped a lot of things that I really should have known. So I kind of cleaned myself up before I had to teach it. But what I'll tell you is that taking a good course on programming early on to know the fundamentals is critical, and it will save you so much time. And the next fundamental is probability and statistics. I do computer vision and machine learning and all that, but ultimately you really need to understand the fundamentals of probability and statistics at some point. You got to check that box to really understand what's happening. So that would be pillar number 2. And then pillar number 3, like John said, is you need to do some work. And there are now, what's amazing to me is how many opportunities and data sets are just out there in the world. And so, build a portfolio and put it up. You can create a Git account and you can share it with the world and show people what your stuff is. Kaggle competitions, it's not about winning the competition, but I'll tell you that there's this amazing global community of people who you can go up and ask questions, and people will just jump up there and offer advice and help. And there's other forms like that. That's just the one that I'm familiar with. But if you do those 3 things, opportunities will come your way, right? Learn the fundamentals and do work and make sure that it's out there for the world to see. And that's how you generate these opportunities. Have a portfolio online where you can show people how you've solved problems. And everybody understands at least something about sports to a certain extent. And so putting sports problems up in your portfolio is a great way to kind of illustrate the real skill sets that you have available. And it's easy for people to understand and interpret that. Even if they're not a data scientist themselves, that can get you an internship or get hired at one of these companies.
So I was going to say that Sam wasn't actually going last, I was, but then he proceeded to say everything I was thinking about. So I don't get to go last, but here's where we're at. We've got about 6 minutes left on the webinar today. I'm going to go ahead and answer a question that came in. And while I'm doing that, I'd ask the other 3 panelists to just kind of think about a last, 1 or 2 minute thought that they want to leave the audience with. The question that came in is, what's the likelihood that a platform like Zebra gets, an agreement with NCAA football, similar to how it is in the NFL, or that, Second Spectrum has with the NBA? What's the likelihood of seeing that at the college level? And what I'll say is, we are starting to see some of that happen. In some cases, it's done at the individual school level. At some cases, it's being done at the conference level. I know some conferences have implemented, while it's not Second Spectrum, it's, Shot Tracker or something like that. But we're starting to see things get implemented at the conference level or the individual school level. Yes, I do think we're going to see more of that. However, I also, working at the college level, have seen some resistance to it and some concern about, wearable data on student athletes from a privacy concern. I mean, some of the various players associations have weighed in on this at the professional level. So there is some resistance as well. I think we'll see more of it start to happen, but I don't know how widespread it's going to be. But as we talked about before, just the ability to do a lot of things from video, from broadcast quality video, or even just homegrown video, I think we're going to see much of the types of analyses that are enabled by these customized systems happen at lower levels, but maybe not through the implementation of those systems. At least that's my thinking on it. Okay, we're down to 4 minutes left, so each of us gets a minute left. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because I want to pile on sort of what you just said, is that, I work on health and safety, and the reason that I would really love to see these systems come in at the college level is for health and safety purposes, because there is a whole level of insight that you get whenever you can start to analyze that data for injury prevention purposes and those sorts of things. And right now, that opportunity, I think, doesn't exist. And something else that's important, and I'll just kind of throw out there that we know about the NCAA and compared to the NFL is it's very difficult to study injury and do injury risk mitigation at the team level. The sample size is not big enough. So one of the things that's been really exciting to see in the NFL is the way that the NFL teams have collaborated to share data with engineers on the safety side so that we can see the bigger picture and we can develop insights at the NFL level about what better protects the athletes. And if NCAA conferences bought into that idea, it would be a sea change in what you could do and what you could understand. And that doesn't really, as far as I know, that doesn't sort of exist. And so that would really be good because you can't do it one team at a time because you need a large enough sample in order to sort of look across the community. So I am really hoping that happens because I'd love to see the insights that we generate at the NFL cascade down and help sort of the next level of football and other sports as well.
Great. John, what would you like to leave our audience with?
It's just that more or less sports analytics, I think that it's here to stay for sure. I mean, whether it's, Pro Football Focus or whether you have other companies like Second Spectrum that Sam has mentioned a couple of times, as well, Next Gen Stats. I mean, it's something that's on the rise. And even from like a higher education standpoint, where I'm at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, I'm in the School of Data Science, and that's the first of the Carolinas. Syracuse University a couple of years ago became the first school to where you could actually get an undergrad degree in sports analytics. I don't really see any signs of it slowing down at all because it is an appetite that I think that continues to get stronger and stronger. So I think this is just the beginning really for all of us, for sure.
All right, Costas, your turn.
Yeah, I think one kind of advice I want to give to those that want to get into analytics in general, not just sports analytics, but since you're talking about sports analytics, is to not quit. I mean, so as Sam mentioned, getting fundamentals is important, and getting these fundamentals can be tough initially. Can be same as a high mountain to climb, but don't quit. Just keep pushing and try to get the appropriate help from people around you that no one can help you, and just keep trying.
All right, well, thanks to all three of you. My final word would just be, hey, it's an exciting time. There's a lot of fun and interesting work to be done that is of value in many different ways, from improving teams, improving player health and safety, keeping our fans better informed and more engaged, all of these areas. There's a lot going on, and I don't like you said, John, I think it's going to continue to grow. And there's room for more people under the tent, as they say. So please come join us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to John Lynn.
Sorry, a little technical difficulties there. Well, thank you, Scott, Costas, Sam, John. Phenomenal content. We had a lot of engagement. I have to apologize to the audience. We had so many questions that came in. We couldn't answer them all. So. But really appreciate everybody's time, and this recording will be shared with everybody that's attended, and if you want to share it with others, please feel free to do so. And we appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks again to you four gentlemen. Really great stuff. And keep an eye out for our next webinar that'll be in the July time from the Analytics Enthusiasts. And thanks again, and everybody have a great night.
All right, thanks for the opportunity. Good to meet all you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.